Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're here with Dan Cohen of Soltec Health. I'm really excited to jump into some things with Dan. Dan, you've got a remarkable company, remarkable background. I love some of the things that you're touching on here with Soltec. Of course, I'll let you touch on that for sure. But I think what the audience would love to know, as investors are always taking a look at breakout technologies like this, and you're in a space, I think really you're a space creator, if you will, an industry creator, because I have not seen anything like this before in my life. I think I've been around this industry for a good bit to have experienced some technologies out there, and you're head and shoulders above the crowd. But before we jump into all that, Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell the audience who you are, just a little bit about your background. I think that'd be great, and we'll get into some things here that I have planned.
Great. Thanks, Izzy. Well, I started out in my career actually as a physician. So I went to medical school, became a neurologist, and then became board certified. Had great offers to join practices, but I really wasn't interested in practicing neurology. So I immediately went into business and started a company called CNS Inc. And that business started out all about medical products, particularly neurologic products. We made the first automated brainwave monitor to help prevent strokes during high risk surgeries, particularly open heart surgery, carotid endarterectomies. And then we migrated the technology into sleep disorders diagnostics. So when we went into the sleep field, there were only about 300 sleep labs globally. This was back in 1985. And then we expanded that field because we took the sleep staging and scoring time down from essentially 4 to 6 hours to a couple of minutes. So that allowed sleep labs to grow. And when we left that field in 1995, 10 years later, there were about 3,000 labs. And
Wow.
one of the reasons we left that field is we had taken on a consumer product. And that product is now known as the Breathe Right nasal strip. And so we launched that. We were already a public company. We made the transition, during our early days in the sleep field. And we added another consumer product. Ultimately, we sold that business in 2006 to GlaxoSmithKline for 566 million. But along the way, I kind of felt guilty that I took all this time in medicine and I didn't really apply it. And one of the things that bothered me in medical school was learning that 75 to 90% of all medical problems are either caused or made worse by chronic stress.
Yes.
Essentially, this is a primary pathology in medicine. And so I wanted to solve that. And so even before CNS was over, we started a company that is now known as Soltec Health. And that's really what we're going to get into today in our discussion.
Dan, I'm with you, and I totally appreciate that. In fact, I've heard it said before, the two words in disease really take a close look at that, dis and ease, right? So when you talk about stress and the chronic illnesses that come out of that, I mean, one of the prevalent ones that people talk about all the time is high blood pressure, right? So that can be easily caused by stress. But what else comes out of stress that maybe are the top couple three issues that we're dealing with in the field of medicine today?
Well, you're right, Izzy. Hypertension is a direct result of chronic stress. And when you look at just hypertension, let alone all the other things, hypertension leads to cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and the like, stroke. And these are the major chronic illnesses that we face in the United States and really around the world. I mean, heart disease is the number one, issue in medicine. So that's a really big one. But look at all the psychiatric and psychological problems, related to stress. I mean, anxiety is obviously comes to mind. And usually when you say stress, most people think, yeah, anxiety. And that's right, they should. And from that comes depression and a host of other issues, especially some childhood issues in terms of the nervous system. So that's a big problem. The other problems that generally result from stress that are widespread in nature are the um, problems related to immunology. Because when you have stress, your immune system does not work as well. And as a result, infectious disease, autoimmune diseases, even cancer are all results of an insufficient immune response. So
Mm.
that's a big problem. And then you get into the endocrine issues, the different hormones that are impacted by stress because the regulatory mechanisms are not working well.
Well, certainly when I think about what you mentioned earlier with breathe right strips with a $500 million exit, right? That was just simply for better breathing, right? Maybe some snoring. I mean, I see the picture of Jerry Rice back there, one of the greatest wide receivers of all time, played for the San Francisco 49ers. If he really believed I could breathe better with that, what a great ambassador for the product. And yet, if you saw a $500 million exit with just breathing better, I mean, my goodness, I mean, the sky's the limit for a potential exit with Soltec. Of course, let me just preface the fact we're not making any promises or guarantees or anything, but you're certainly broaching the topic of you've really hit square in the nose the problems that we're faced with in healthcare today. And that's all of these chronic illnesses that come out of stress. And just as a side adjunct, if you don't mind, before we jump into some of the granular details of Soltec, what was it about COVID, in your opinion, that really heightened the visibility to more stress? I mean, there were dysfunctional marriages that when you put them into a household and locked them up for a couple of years, that they ended their marriages, right? There were other people that sort of felt these pressures, whatever they were, and anxiety was on the rise. All of this stuff started happening. What was it about COVID, in your opinion, that triggered that?
I think the key is it disrupted people's socialization practices. Whether they were isolated or they couldn't meet. I mean, think about all the restaurants that went out of business. Think about how little you met with people compared to the way you interacted previously. So I think
Mhm.
that really was number one. Then there was this fear about, wait a minute, what if I get it? What if I get long COVID? What are the ramifications? We know so little about, this disease state and what's going to happen next. So once a problem starts to occur, then you start looking for other issues. So, it's one of those things that has a trickle down effect that doesn't seem to end very well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think it's been said before that one of the worst punishments you can give a human being is solitary confinement, right? So there were a lot of people that were dealing with that solitary confinement, if you will. And here's Soltec now that is on the precipice of breaking out to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, to reduce all those issues that would cause these chronic illnesses, obviously over time, right? And I'd love for you to jump into that and share anything that you'd like to with your screen, with your deck, or anything like that. But I think the audience, the investor audience that is, would really love to know how does this impact the medical community? If I could have this in my own home, my office, maybe in a natural homeopathic setting where they would utilize this for sessions for people to be able to have this. So I'll pass the floor over to you and take it away, Dan, whatever it is that you want to share.
Yeah, yeah. Let me bring up this deck because I think this deck will help explain an awful lot about, what it is we're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Izzy, I think you nailed it when you said the word industry. And what we're really talking about here is not just a product, and that's important. And we really are talking about both consumer-based products and medical products that will come out of this technology. And so let's start on the consumer side, and that's stress and poor sleep, because those two issues in combination cause or worsen 75 to 90% of all medical conditions. So that's
That's
a bit of a juncture between consumer and medical. And what's interesting is we can treat both of these issues, stress and poor sleep, with a consumer product that does not require FDA approval. And again, as you mentioned, we're pioneering a new consumer industry that has these consumer issues followed by other medical issues, some of which are due to chronic stress and poor sleep, but also some of which are independent. So this technology has broad ramifications. Okay, so let's just start out with the first three major applications, and they are poor sleep and stress and what we call diabetic peripheral neuropathy, DPN. And again, the consumer, when they hear poor sleep, if they have insomnia, they're going to think of themselves as part of that group. Same thing
Sure.
with stress and anxiety. Okay. So these are very large markets, and we're just showing US market sizes right here. And, again, when you pare down, what will be our market share in the years to come, they're very large numbers. We're addressing mammoth issues. And what's great about this is the fact that we're talking about a simple solution that is easy to operate and again does not require the user's time. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So this is one of those products. It took us forever to develop this, but I think it was really worth it. Okay, next slide. This is the system as it stands today. It's a closed loop feedback system. And let me start on the right, because the right side is what we call Z-Gen. It's the magnetic conditioner. This is the therapeutic aspect of the technology. So this produces magnetic stimulation that supports and influences any part of the nervous system we wish to influence. And I'll cover that in a little bit. Um, of note, you see in the middle of the page a wearable. We have made this generator such that it can be operated using other wearables. So if other companies wish to license our technology and co-sell our generator, that can be done.
Oh, wow.
Also, I think it's important to note the existing wearable market is purely only a market that has these wearables, whether they're wrist worn or they're rings. They only measure biometric data. They are not in and of themselves therapeutic at all. And that's a huge drawback. I hear from people all of the time the fact that, my wearable's nice about telling me how poorly I slept, but it doesn't do anything to improve my sleep. And your
Sure.
system does. And that's a common issue. So our technology really will likely change the landscape of wearable technology. All right. So again, Z-Gen is kind of the star of the show because it provides the therapy. Z-Track, our wearable, is a very nice wearable. You only have to wear it at night, but it provides the feedback to the generator. And so what happens is in real time, Z-Track will analyze your sleep. And as you change into a different stage of sleep, let's say as you move from light sleep into deep sleep, and again, deep sleep is the most important stage of sleep, Z-Track will recognize that and it will immediately send Z-Gen a Bluetooth signal to say, okay, it's time to change the frequencies that you need to generate to assist in increasing deep sleep. So it's real-time sleep stage enhancement. In addition, even though we're dealing with a very, very tiny area of the nervous system that influence the different sleep stages, we each operate a little bit differently along that spectrum of frequencies. And so to give everybody the best benefit, we do a calibration process in the beginning and then throughout its use to make sure we're giving you the frequencies you need. We call that Res-F for resonant frequency. And so we're personalizing this signal that you get, not only in terms of the right resonant frequency for you, but also in regards to the right sleep stage that you're presently in. That's really key. And then on the left, you can see that, yeah, of course, we have an app. You can buy it, or actually, you don't have to buy it. Download it on the App Store or Google Play, so it's iOS and Android compatible. And
Excellent.
what that app does is it displays the data and it allows you to operate essentially the system in different ways. All right, let me give you a very basic lesson in neurology for a second. There's a part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. This is sort of automatic. It's below your conscious awareness in terms of what it does. And this part of the nervous system began to evolve about 500 million years ago. So it's really, really primitive. And it started to evolve because fish started to develop organs. And these organs needed to be regulated. And this didn't need to be something that you had to think about. This had to be something that occurred automatically. And so there are two major divisions of this autonomic nervous system. The first that evolved was called the sympathetic division, and that's what we're showing here. And on the left, you can see that sympathetic is known for fight or flight. And if you are operating under this part of the autonomic nervous system too much, it creates chronic stress. And
Okay.
that can lead to all the problems you see in the middle. Okay. Again, we're talking about 75 to 90% of all illnesses are due to chronic stress or are worsened by it. So
Well,
this
let's
is
take something
this
like someone
is
who might have a an apneic episode every night with sleep apnea, where they stop breathing, and that's that fight or flight sort of response mechanism. Like, oh my gosh, I'm choking, and then they wake up and fall back to sleep again. Maybe they weren't even consciously aware of it, but certainly their body is feeling that stress. Am I right, Dan?
You are absolutely correct. Their body is feeling the stress, and that's one of the conditions that actually worsens stress. And obviously, I mean, I don't have to tell you that it worsens sleep too.
Yeah.
And sleep and stress are just intimately, interactive. If you have too much stress, you're not going to sleep well. And if you don't sleep well, you're much more predisposed to having more stress.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a downward spiral, essentially. You know, and just another fact that I think is important, even though we know that 75 to 90% of all medical conditions are impacted by chronic stress, an independent survey by the American Association of Family Physicians basically showed that these family physicians all believe that 75 to 90% of their office visits are due to stress. So, this is how big a problem chronic stress is. And most people don't even realize it.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I think people just sort of tolerate it. And this is if they have a spouse laying next to them that would nudge them and say, "Hey, do you realize you're snoring?" Gosh, I'm thinking about all the people that don't even realize how badly they're snoring and the apneic episodes that happen through the night. This can create a lot of stress. I mean, that would have to elevate blood pressure and increase hypertension. Am I right?
Oh, it does. People with obstructive sleep apnea tend to have high blood pressure. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
No,
go ahead.
the body's all tied together. You can't have one major thing not impact a whole bunch of other things. And chronic stress and sleep are major issues, regarding the body and healthcare.
That makes a lot of
Okay.
sense.
Here's the flip side of the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, and that's the parasympathetic division. This is known for rest and digest. This is the antidote to chronic stress. All right. So think about these divisions for a second. Sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Think about them as two ends of a seesaw. So when one is up, the other is down, and vice versa. So you really want to increase parasympathetic activity, not only because it's beneficial, but because it decreases sympathetic activity. In other words, decreasing stress. So the key is how do we find a way to activate the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system so that chronic stress goes away? And what we had to do was learn the language of the nervous system. And what we realized is we could speak that language and influence different areas of the nervous system. And when you look on the left and you see these different frequencies associated with different parts of the brain, if you notice where it says pons, fourth line down, the frequency range of that structure is 0.15 to zero point 0.4 cycles per second. So this is well below brainwave frequencies. And if you look at the diagram of the brain structures, that's part of the brainstem. That's the very base of the brain. It's primitive. This is what this was evolved during with fish, amphibians, reptiles. So this is well below your conscious awareness. This, although it influences your cerebral hemispheres, the big part of your thinking brain. It really operates independently. And this is the area that needed to be targeted in order to treat stress.
It's fascinating.
Okay. And just another thing out of interest is that as each layer developed on top of the prior layers, they had to operate at higher frequencies, and that's why the higher brain, the cortex, operates at frequencies from 5 to 40 cycles per second. So the more underlying functions that it interacts with, the higher the frequency has to be so that it can interact with those different functions. And that's how the nervous system evolved. So it makes perfect sense, and we had to tap into that in order to be able to make this product work simply, non-invasively, safely, and it really only requires the press of a button to make it all work. That's the beauty of it.
One of the most fascinating things for me over the last 5 years has been the rejuvenation of stem cells. Did even something like this help with stem cell rejuvenation, healing, things of that nature by just getting better sleep? Because I just found it very interesting. Why is it that infants have so much more? Well, that makes with activity with stem cell. Well, it makes sense because their bodies are growing and everything. But I also remember my kids, they would sleep like 12, 15 hours a day when they were infants. So there's got to be a correlation with sleep and stem cell activity. I mean, I think I'm no medical expert, obviously, but I would just defer to you on that question.
Yeah, well, this slide, you can see this new slide explains exactly what you're talking about. This shows the different stages of sleep, and if you see on the left, at 5 years of age, you basically have about 9 hours of sleep in a 5-year-old, and then
Mhm.
as you get to the right, when you're 85, you're down to 5 hours and 20 minutes.
Wow.
Okay. So you've lost a lot of sleep. And if you look at the biggest area that you lose, it's that black area in the middle. That's deep sleep. It's also known as delta sleep or slow wave sleep. And
Hmm.
you talk about cell repair, stem cells, all of those things.
Hmm.
Well, guess what? During deep sleep, that's when growth hormone is secreted. And
Hmm.
that's what does all of those functions you spoke about. And if you
Okay.
look at that decline in slow wave sleep, and then you look at that little box on the right showing the increase in chronic illnesses as we age, there's a perfect inverse correlation between decreasing slow wave sleep and increasing chronic illness.
Well, my assumption here is completely anecdotal, but I'm just immediately thinking about a friend slash associate that had some stem cell injections in his knees to improve his knees. And then he said, gosh, within a week or so, he was back up skiing again the way he was skiing in his 20s. Now, I'm wondering, does this device serve as an excellent accoutrement, if you will, to getting stem cell injections anywhere and also getting better sleep, better rest, relaxation, eliminating stress? Would that even perform better utilizing a device like this in conjunction with stem cell injections?
Well, of course, because this stage of sleep, we have the ability with this technology to increase or to restore deep sleep. And as a result, all of the hormonal changes that are associated with that occur, and growth hormone is responsible for cell repair and cell regeneration. Okay. So yes, that's why this is such an important stage of sleep. It is the most important stage of sleep.
Unbelievable. So, of course, we're not making medical claims here, folks, but I think what I'm hearing as well is I'm thinking other verticals, right? From therapeutic to even looking at the physical therapy side, mental therapy side of things, people with stress, anxiety, dealing with all these things. And this one device is hitting everyone on the nail on the head. That's just remarkable to me. I mean, everybody needs something like this to ensure that we're getting great sleep. But it begs the question for any investor audience there that might say, well, I take a handful of sleep gummies each night and I take melatonin. I'm getting great sleep. What if they just continue putting that on the market for 1995 versus something like this? And I'm sure you'll share what the price point is, but versus something like this in a household, why not just take a handful of melatonin sleep gummies and we're all good?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Melatonin is helpful for essentially jet lag if you're traveling eastward. Okay. It does nothing to increase deep sleep. And frankly, there is nothing on the market that does this. This is a major discovery. This is why this technology is so unique, because it restores nervous function. And so I can give you countless examples of people that are using this technology that have restored deep sleep as a result. And that's the I think that's the most important part of this technology when it comes to sleep. Okay. Now, when we talk about things like diabetic peripheral neuropathy, we not only have seen that this technology takes away the pain, but we've also seen peripheral nerve growth and therefore improvement in sensation. So this whole technology has what's called a neurogenesis effect. It not only enhances nervous function, but what we're seeing is restoration. And really that's not surprising because over the past 30 years, we've learned in neurology this thing called neuroplasticity, where the nervous system really is dynamic and different aspects, well, really all aspects can grow. It just depends on how they're stimulated.
Hmm. That makes a lot of good sense. I'm thinking about the folks that are maybe getting chemotherapy, radiological treatments, and they experience peripheral neuropathy. Without making any medical claims from what you just said, and of course, just covering that, we're not making any medical claims here, folks. But the evidence is the evidence, right, Dan? I mean, we can't dismiss that. We're
Yeah,
we're not saying that you use this and it's going to cure neuropathy. We're saying that there's been cases, or you're saying there's been cases that you're seeing incredible results, remarkable results with people using this for peripheral neuropathy. So it begs the question, why wouldn't someone or why couldn't someone use this in that setting where maybe they're dealing with some cancer treatment? It's very, very common to experience peripheral neuropathy with chemotherapy and radiological treatments. Can you speak to that for a moment and we'll jump to some other things?
sure. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because if you would have asked me 5 years ago, will this technology help with peripheral neuropathy? I would have said no. And it turns out that um, our first person with peripheral neuropathy, he was using it for relaxation, and his peripheral neuropathy was due to chemotherapy, and he
Mm,
got better. And for the
wow.
life of me, I couldn't figure it out. And I said, well, I guess this technology does a lot more than I expected. And I've continued to see that. But yeah, it was a big surprise to me.
That is absolutely incredible. So, Dan, let's talk about the business side of this for a second.
Yeah,
Clearly, the efficacy of what you're doing is just remarkable with this product. And if I'm understanding it correctly, and what you've explained to me before, you could sit in your chair or you're laying down in bed, and this could be at the foot of the bed, or your feet potentially resting on top of this in a lazy boy, if you will, watching the Super Bowl, and you're getting therapeutic treatment right there. So it's not, this is in the comfort of your own home. And let's talk about the price point for a device like this that's very simple to use. Unlike a lot of things that I've seen on the market today, from sleep devices to even the cooling devices, if they could maybe make the nerve endings cool and hopefully prevent damage to nerve endings and things like that with radiological treatments and chemotherapy or anything like that. But what's the price point of something like this, that the ease of use and how this will break into the market?
Yeah, the price point for this system is $1,300. It could be paid out over time or one payment. So it seems pricey, but given the benefits, I think they're well worth it. So
Hmm.
right now, globally, there are 200 plus million people with diabetic peripheral neuropathy. So this is
Wow.
a major problem, and it's only going to get worse because the projections are that diabetes will get worse. And actually, Izzy, this gets back to stress. The more stress you have, the worse you eat. I mean,
Oh,
stress
wow.
is
Yeah.
associated with obesity, and obesity is associated with diabetes. So again, all of this is tied together. And when you look at, our results when it comes to peripheral neuropathy, um, we've done our proof of concept study. We have incredibly statistically significant results in terms of reduction of pain and improvement of sensation. And we've had our first discussion with the FDA, and they've kind of winked and told us, hey, this is going to take a de novo application. We've already been through the statistical analysis, and we realize we only need about 30 people to make it through the study. And we can present to the FDA for clearance. So we are moving forward on this process because we do want clearance. This will be our first clearance when we get it.
That's incredible. Okay, so let's talk about the capital that you're immediately looking for, and what that would go towards, and where you see this maybe as an exit in the future, an IPO, an acquisition, something like that. Of course, we're not making any claims here. We're not making any offers to buy or sell anything. We just want to heighten the visibility to some knowledge here, and then you make a determination whether or not it makes sense for us to continue dialoguing with someone that is interested in this, and then meeting with Dan potentially and his team. But that's my long-winded disclaimer. But Dan, why don't you just speak to the fact of you're raising capital, and there's some things that you're going to be doing that would help fast track where this company could go. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Right. We've invested $3 million on intellectual property because we essentially want to own this category. We want a monopoly on this. And so we've filed throughout the world, and we've got enough patents either, issued or pending or in preparation that will generate 1,000 claims. Okay, so we have a very substantial patent portfolio, and we have a trade secret file. So that's really key from an investment standpoint because I think it all starts there. And I think most entrepreneurs don't pay enough attention to that. I mean, this is key. When you're doing something new, you need to have great protection so that you can carry this forward. And ultimately, a large company, that's what they're acquiring. You might have a substantial business already, but they want to know that business is protectable and
Sure.
they can grow it. So I think this is vital. Although we don't consider ourselves part of the wearable business per se, because we have a whole system, yes, it includes a wearable. We
Yeah.
look at those companies that are involved in wearables as potential partners or acquirers. Okay, so we've already thought through our go-to-market and exit strategies, and we try to do that so that we could align our tactics to cover both. All right. So first, we formed a nice alliance with Best Buy, and so we'll be selling through Best Buy's website early next year. And Best Buy loves the idea of bundling existing wearables with our, generator, in some fee splitting arrangement. And that's what we bring to the table that's unique is the generator and the whole process of a closed loop feedback system. And our main independent patent claim covers that. Okay, that's the beauty of that. And so when we look at the wearables companies, the top two on that list, Samsung and Apple, uh, they're ahead of the others. Apple's ahead of Samsung in that business. And when you look at the top four, and I'm not showing the top four here, I'm showing US companies here, well, except for Samsung, which is South Korean. But the top four wearable companies are Samsung, Apple, Xiaomi, and Huawei, two Chinese companies. And you have to ask yourself, why are those the top four? And are they in this purely for, the business of wearables? And the answer is no. They're primarily in the wearable business to protect their market share of smartphones. Because once a
Sure.
consumer ties the wearable to the smartphone, they're not going to switch smartphones.
That's really smart, Dan. You know what I love about that is it really underscores that model of the razor and the razor blade, right? So if I've got an Apple device and something like this particular device here, where now I don't want to give up my iPhone or anything. I'm going to continue buying an iPhone. Or maybe it's someone like Apple that decides, hey, we want to make this even stronger for that type of person. So let's buy the company Soltec, if you will, or this technology from them, and it just makes their technology that much more residualized income, if you will, for the future. So I love that. I love the model of the razor and the razor blade. So that's really, really strong. Tell us what you're going to do with however much capital that you're looking for. I know that you and I have talked about arranging an outside entity like an SPV where there's the propensity of these outside investors to want to acquire something like this, but maybe they stick their toe in the water and give you a little bit of money by way of an SPV. What does it look like as far as the capital that you're going to need and what you're going to hit the gas with here in the coming months?
Yeah. Well, we're starting to go to market now. So there's a need to build inventory and to get the word out. And so we've got to do that. And Best Buy's getting ready to sell it. So we know that's going to uptick sales. I'm beginning to appear on podcasts. I was on a big one Friday and today. So those are starting to resonate, and we're starting to generate awareness. We've shown that we can get sales with direct-to-consumer digital ads, over the internet. So that's positive. But there's another very important reason to raise capital now, and it's on the right side of this slide, geographic expansion.
Hmm.
There's a market that is ideal for this technology, and that's Japan and really Asia. And Japan's the gateway to Asia. And that's because this is a magnetic therapy, and the Asian culture reveres magnetism and its healing capabilities.
Sure.
So every consultant I've spoken with says, you better be prepared to make a lot of product when you enter the Asian market.
Hmm.
And we want to enter the Asian market next year. So it's really key because that'll basically force rapid expansion and quite frankly, it'll probably precipitate an exit.
That is really, really exciting. Well, folks, if you've been watching here, obviously we broached the topic on what it would look like with raising some capital. The granular details, we can get together and have a meeting about that, potentially even meet with Dan as well. And we can go into the sales that they're doing now, as well as the type of go-to-market strategy they've got with the monies that they're raising. You've probably seen come across your screen there to click on that link to set up a time where you can meet with Dan and myself. I'd love to make the introduction if it's appropriate. But Dan, your final thoughts on wrapping up here on where you see the start of this, which is in 2025, and where it really whets the appetite to procure that type of acquisition in the future. What does that road look like? Of course, we're not making any guarantees, any medical claims, anything like that whatsoever. But just from what you can see, what does that look like for the future? Is this a 20, 30-year play? Is this, a few months? Where's that land in your opinion?
Okay. Can you see this new slide?
Too.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to realize how we're structured right now. Okay. Although we go by the name of Soltec Health, we're really doing business as Soltec Health, but the company was originally founded using the name Round River Research Corp. Okay.
Uh,
And what you see here in the corporate structure is we can easily create two subsidiaries, Soltec Health on the consumer end, Soltec Medical on the medical end. Okay. And if somebody wants to just buy Soltec Health, they can. We can divisionalize the patents in a way that they can be split so somebody could have just the consumer side. All right. And we'd be willing to do that because the medical side, in truth, would be valued to a higher extent. But yet we haven't taken that out in any way from a commercial standpoint yet. All right.
Sure.
But it's very valuable and it wouldn't take us long to get a claim. So if somebody came to us next year and said, hey, we want to buy Soltec Health, we'd be open to those discussions. And we would immediately beef up Soltec Medical. Obviously, the shareholders would get some of that money, so there would be an exit. And quite frankly, I have past experience, as does our management team, with running public companies. So I ran a public company for 19 years. So none of that's of concern to me. And I would like to see Soltec Medical become a public company probably in 2026. So there would be liquidity from that standpoint too. So I've already been in this company a long, long time. So I'm predisposed to a sooner rather than later kind of exit thinking.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And again, of course, we're not making any kind of guarantees or anything. And why don't we just finish up here with I'm just going to stop this and sharing the screen. But your final thoughts here, because what I'm looking at is something that's really category creation in the medical arena. And it's exciting. That's the long and the short of it. I think there's a small window of opportunity. If you have interest in meeting with Dan, for sure you've been seeing that link pop up. Click on there. We'll schedule some time and see if it makes sense to speak with Dan any further. But you don't need a lot of money, and we'll go into all the granular details when we meet with Dan. We don't want to just simply throw those numbers around here. But the bottom line is, Dan, you don't need a lot of money, and that's what I find is so exciting. You've extended your checkbook and put in a lot of money, as have some folks that have partnered with you and behind you on this. But you don't need a lot of money when I look through the numbers. And the acquisition side of this, I could just see a big payday. Again, not making any future claims or anything, but I could see a big name just wanting to have that for themselves and saying, hey, this is going to be proprietary to our brand, and that's going to elevate the purchase of whether it's iPhones or Samsung Galaxy Notes or whatever it is. I just see the writing on the wall with this because this touches all walks of life. So folks, if you're interested, go ahead and click on the link here. We're going to wrap up with just Dan's final thoughts on anything related to this category creation that he sees now just in embarking with this company and what's going to be happening here over the next couple of years. Anything you want to share with investors off top of mind here, Dan, before we wrap up? And I'm going to pass that over to you, and then we'll close this up here and looking to get together with you with some investors that are interested for sure.
Yeah, I think you touched on one of the points that's I think is key, and that is, I've always worked in my entire 40-year business career on creating novel, innovative technologies. And part of the reason is I like to make discoveries,
Mm,
but the other part is kind of selfish, and that is it makes for cheap marketing. When you have something that's new, the press wants to hear about it. I mean, that's how
yeah.
I launched Breathe Right. And when I went to launch Breathe Right, Procter and Gamble wanted to buy it, and this was pre-internet, and they said, you can't launch a consumer product for under $50 million. Well, we got football players to wear it after we got it into distribution, and we had a $60 million business overnight, and it cost us less than $1 million. And then they
Wow.
called up afterwards and they said, you just rewrote the textbook on how to launch a consumer product. Well,
Wow.
right now, I'm having no problem attracting podcasters. I talked to somebody 3 days ago. I was on their podcast. They have 1.5 million followers. I did another podcast today, 1.7 million followers. So, people love to hear about stuff that's new, particularly stuff that's going to change the landscape of a number of categories. This one, wearables, smartphones, healthcare. So I think you have to take all these factors, into account, and that's why we don't need a lot of money. So it's going to be a little money that takes us to profitability, and then the awareness generation that will occur will essentially force someone's hand.
Love it, Dan. And I think what Dan is saying here, if you're listening closely and reading between the lines, there's a couple 3 million people that have heard this. The word is starting to get out. The cat's out of the bag, as they say. A percentage of that is certainly with an investor mindset, if you will. My audience is dedicated to investors solely, but certainly in those other audiences, people are starting to hear about this. People are already thinking about the investment, and we're just getting started with this. But that window is going to close relatively quickly. So if you're interested, again, go ahead and click the link. I'm excited to chat with you and Dan to see if it's appropriate, if it makes sense to do that. Of course, we're not looking to just partner with anybody. We're not looking for just money. It's got to be the right type of capital partnership. And Dan, I'm just so impressed with what you've done. The people that you've been able to pick, the people that are working on your team is incredible. They have experience with these areas. So again, click the link below. Let's get some time on the schedule to potentially meet with Dan. But I'm signing off here. Thanks so much, everybody. Izzy Lozada with FEP Collaborative and FEP SPV Ventures. Dan, thank you so much for carving out the time. I think not only do you have a category creator here, but you can really impact the lives of millions that are suffering with those chronic illnesses and just something like dealing with neuropathy and that pain and suffering. You can hit a lot of households, certainly for sure. So thank you so much for doing this. My hat's off to you. It's absolutely remarkable. Great job. All right, everybody. We'll see you on the next one. Looking forward to chatting with you and Dan here soon. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, Izzy.